Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming to join us for this really outrageously interesting conversation around the UAF, the Unified Analytics Framework. Want to give a preview of what we're going to be talking about here. We're going to talk about the UAF and understand it. Jeff's going to give a really nice explanation, discuss it. We're going to kind of probably go around a few times with a bunch of questions, and we're going to look for your feedback as well. So really looking forward to your participation too in this platform. Please enter your questions during the session, and we'll get into it. For introductions, let's start with Jeff. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit here?
Yeah, appreciate it, Kevin. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate that. So my name is Jeff Knepper. I'm a managing partner with Flow Software. Flow helps manufacturers, food and bev, consumer retail, mining, mineral, oil and gas, renewables, energy, basically wrangle their data. So take all of those siloed data sources and provide a centralized place where you can standardize a model, build multi-source calculations, cleanse the data, and then most importantly, share it, bridge it out to everybody in the organization and every application. Before coming to Flow, my background was in time series data with Canary Labs. And it was about 2 years ago, Kevin, that I first on my radar realized that we had a serious data problem for scaling analytics across large enterprise architectures. And that has brought full circle 2 years later to, I think, this conversation.
Awesome, good. We've recognized this problem as well in the industry, and we'll get into it. For myself, I'm Kevin Jones, CEO, Chief Strategist for Ectobox, and we're what we think of as a Industry 4.0 systems integrator. So we implement solutions for manufacturers to get that data, between the ERP system and the hardworking people and machines on the plant floor, and get that data connected. It's really all about real-time visibility into the plant floor. What we do is to connect everything and everyone without proprietary tools to get that real-time visibility. And it's using tools like Flow, Ignition, and Canary, and HighByte, and a whole bunch of others, Factory Studio from Tatsoft, and others out there to put the solutions together. So with that, we were really excited to talk with Jeff because this is a problem in the industry, how to solve these kinds of issues. So with that, let's get into it a little bit. Jeff is going to start off talking for a little bit about existing and past integration architecture, just very high level to summarize the current state or past state, and talk about some of the challenges with that, talk about the UNS, the Unified Namespace, and other solutions, and then talk about the challenges with that. He's already been given a preview. What are the gaps with these kinds of solutions, and then what's the solution? He'll talk about the UAF, and then we're going to get into a really good conversation. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to start the presentation so that we can get these nice animations and go from there.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kevin. So I think we're all pretty familiar with this architecture, right? And we could drop level 1, 2, 3, 4 labels on here and just create the Purdue model. But let's just talk about that standard real quick. Purdue model, mid-90s, early 90s, became the kind of the de facto standard. I think that if we hadn't had the Purdue model and today we said, hey, let's create data architectures for scalable enterprise-wide applications, we probably would build something different, which brings the question to ask, why are we still on a brand new greenfield project? Why are we going down this path? I think part of that is just the experience that's built into our organizations. We do things, we're humans. We don't really embrace and love change, right? We only change when we have serious pain points. And I think that's part of why this is now becoming relevant, is because we're experiencing those pain points. But if we think about the Purdue model, it's really, really site focused. That strong focus in the models are level 0, 1, 2, 3. Level 4 or 5, as a bit of a bolt-on afterwards. Just the fact that when we were deploying these architectures 20, 30 years ago, how often were we really connecting over network sites to plants? How often were we taking a plant data ecosystem and trying to roll it into an enterprise data ecosystem? That's something that's much more recent in our history. And so we know that the model's been broke for a while. It was the UNS message that started to really gain some traction. And it was mainly not because of the gateways, PLCs, devices connecting to SCADA and Historian, right? Like that's not really been the problem. Kevin, you push back if you disagree with me on that, but it's mainly that vertical stack integration that has been the problem, because those little lines going from SCADA to MES to ERP to data lake to analytics, those aren't simple little lines. Those are very complex, lots of code. There's a ton of data pruning and wrangling and shaping and cleansing that's going on. And it's not scalable, right? That's the main issue with this architecture.
When just before we started, you were telling me that you found a new phrase that at the SESME session that they were using, which I think is indicative of the state and value of those kinds of integrations.
Yeah. So John Dyke, Jonathan Wise from SESME organization. CESMII for the audience. I heard the name for 2 years and failed at every Google search because I started it with an S. But the SESME organization is a U.S. government-funded initiative to enable smart manufacturing, to get Industry 4.0 solutions, not just out there, but as the new standard. Meaning, well, I thought everything was an Industry 4.0 solution. No, because we're still doing Industry 3.0 things and just putting Industry 4.0 lipstick on that Industry 3.0 pig, if you will. And it doesn't work. And so John was talking about stove-piped architectures, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it. Most data projects start from a business use case. So somebody's got an idea, there's a problem they're trying to solve, they have an idea. The next thing they do, they figure out the databases, the siloed data that they need to connect to or potentially ingest from. And they start their project. We're going to solve this use case. So we connect to the sources, we ingest the history or the real-time data. We start to work on custom code to integrate multiple data source formats or standards. We create new calculations. We cleanse that data. We validate the outcome, and then we have value. And if you look at those steps from use case to value, where is 80% of the effort, budget, time? It's in that integration piece. It's in the integration layer. And we solve for that use case, and then we have another use case right beside it that starts. And what do? We ingest, we cleanse, we calculate, we validate, and then we add value. And we keep doing these vertical stovepipes every time there's another use case. And we're stranding all of that integration work in each of those individual applications. And that is not Industry 4.0.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next step, I want to keep moving so we have enough time for questions. But another point that you're inferring here, and that I've read in some of the ideas you've been putting out there about the UAF, is that it's an ad hoc process too. There's ad hoc processes going on for data analytics, but even just these integrations too, it ends up being an ad hoc process. We walk into any number of companies, and I can think of several where we've done some major digital transformation assessments and a few others where we walk in and whole solutions, whole integrations, as well as anything around reporting and analytics was ad hoc. They solve a problem at that point in time, and they have somebody that has some technical capabilities, and then they go off and solve another problem. Then they go off and solve another problem. And there's no approach, there's no strategy, there's no framework to use. And that, plus the fact that we're using this discrete system, this stovepipe architecture, can be a real challenge in a bunch of ways. So yeah, all makes a ton of sense. Should I go to the next slide?
Yeah, thank you. And this is where I think, as we move into the next slide, this is where the UNS really has helped, right? It is a strategy first. It's not a vendor that you just go buy software from and solve your problem. This is technology that we can remove and plug and play multiple vendors into this architecture. And what are we going to get? We're going to get a really nice centralized data hub of real-time data. We're going to be able to get some structure, right? Because depending on the technology that you use for your UNS, you're going to likely inherit some type of structure in the actual naming process. So I think most people in the call are familiar with UNS, so I think we can save some time. We don't have to go over all of this again, but pub sub, lightweight, edge driven. The goal here is that everything knows about everything and has access to everything in real time. So Why is this not the solution then? Why is this not solving all of those stovepipe architecture problems? And that's where, for me, about 2 years ago, when I saw this, I said, oh, this is perfect. And then wearing my historian hat, I said, shoot, this is only for real-time data. The very first time that I need access to historical data, I'm right back to that vertical integration between my stacks. So yes, the historian can subscribe to the UNS and get the data in real time and log it into the historian. But how do I feed historical data to my MES applications? How do I get historian data to maybe a data warehouse or to a Power BI tool? What if I have 3 different flavors of historian spread across 42 different plants? I'm right back to all that vertical integration. I'm just not doing it for real-time data.
Yeah, and to be clear to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, so Unified Namespace Viable does solve a really difficult problem, which is for the real-time data, kind of getting rid of that stovepipe stack idea and centralizing everything. So again, like you said, single version of truth, edge-driven, it's an event-driven kind of space where you can publish data in, anything can subscribe data out. However, when you look at the need for historical access, you've named one, and I think there's another, or maybe they're just close relatives of the challenges. One is, okay, if I want to get historical data, then from there, I can't query this unified namespace. Rather, I've got to go back to the historian and then connect the MES with the historian, or connect the ERP with the historian, or connect blah, 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 blah. And so then we get back to that data integration. Or for me, the way I've looked at it is that an alternative is we can use the unified namespace, and we can have, because the unified namespace, we're publishing data from all these different systems, and we have a full model of the plant in the unified namespace. We have all the data available to us. So if we wanted to, we could pull all that data off into an analytics tool, pull all that data, or as much as we need to store, pull it into ERP or into MES or some other database that we can then analyze that data. But at that point, then we're storing, or storing, subscribing to and storing multiple versions, duplicate data across the whole organization to do this almost ad hoc analysis of each of these layers. And so it becomes, it makes the problem even worse at that point, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And all you're going to do at that next warehouse is more vertical stack integration anyway. So you feel like you're not, but you're still going to stovepipe every application. So when Seek says, hey, really cool pattern recognition, advanced trending, and Seek Workbench, you should try it. And you say, yeah, I want to try it. You're going to go to that history record, that single source of historic truth for your organization, and you're going to go build integration on top of Seek's application. You're not going to do data integration in a centralized location. You're going to do it at the application layer. All you've done is created a fancy, newer version of a stovepipe architecture. And it, like, there's a new game I'm going to play, and it's identify stovepipes in the wild. I think it'll be fun when we do tours to start like pointing out and calling out Industry 3.0 wearing the 4.0 lipstick, right? Because that's what we keep doing.
Yeah, that's fair. Robbie brings up a good point too, that it's not only historians, but even accessing recipes, past
Right.
and present. Completely fair.
100%.
And if I think about it, you are very active with your Integrate Live channel, and one of the most recent sessions you did there was specifically to pull in recipes from SAP,
That's
PLC
right.
Next, Canary, and software, toolbox tools, and yeah, absolutely huge.
Yeah. We have to think more than historian here, because it's all of the transactional records. It's things like recipes. It's maintenance records. It is personnel records. Um, another really nice point from John at Sesame that I picked up last week. And, this is kind of the way that my brain works, is I just try to surround myself by really smart guys and really smart gals, and read a lot. And that's how I absorb and learn. People that we meet and the books that we read. But he said, hey, at the end of the day, whether it's the plant data ecosystem or the enterprise data ecosystem, there's only three things we really care about. It's machines, it's material, and it's manpower.
Yep.
That's all we're measuring right now at the plant level. And here's my spin kind of to that. At the plant level, I think it's very micro, right? We're very in tune with the granularity of those three things. At the enterprise level, it's probably a bit more focused macro. But have you thought about why all of a sudden we're feeling this pinch? What type of analytics does the micro focus on? It focuses on descriptive and diagnostic analytics. That's the play there. It's what happened and why did it happen. And most descriptive and diagnostic analytics up until this point have been done visually. Somebody looking at a trend screen, somebody taking maybe two data sources and overlaying them on a visual and saying, oh, I can see the correlation between this tag and this event. Well, it's the prescriptive and the predictive analytics that typically are happening more focused on the enterprise data landscape. That is why we have this problem, because now all of a sudden, I don't just need real-time data. I don't just need data from a historian data set for 30 days. I need it from almost every single one of my siloed data sources across the plant and across the enterprise. And I need it in large quantities, but I need it with context, and I need it clean, and I need it ready to use. And so this concept of data readiness is I think, data ops and data readiness are going to be the two huge plays in our space over the next 10 years. And back to what you said earlier, it can't be ad hoc. We have to have a strategy. And so what I want to present here is what has really come out from my experience, from Graham Welton's experience, from talking with you, Kevin, David Schultz, Walker, Alan Ray, just bringing a lot of really bright men and women together and just having a conversation around what is the strategy for high-level analytics, and how do we complement the UNS while also helping solve one of the problems that is causing people to be hesitant on adopting UNS. And I think we should move forward to the slide around where we bring in some more gateways, PLCs.
This one or next?
Oh, yeah. So real quick, I'm sorry, I forgot the slide was even in here. When we talk about analytics, like, we should probably define what the real goals are here. What is it that we want to accomplish when we say we're going to do analytics? Okay, well, we have to define our structure. We need to know and identify the KPIs and the events that we're going to want to measure. So think of this as information governance. We have to, as an organization, we have to say, this is what we're going after. This is who's going to be responsible. This is how we're going to calculate this KPI. This is our standard for measuring this type of event and reporting on it. So information governance has to have a piece in it. We have to be able to accommodate calendars. So when does my day start? What shift patterns do I run? When is my fiscal year? Is a production year the same as a fiscal year? I can't do KPI roll-ups if I don't understand time. And then, of course, we have to be able to connect to real-time, historic, NoSQL and relational databases, transactional records, manual data entry. We have to have all of that come in to do proper analytics. We have to be able to cleanse the data, throw out the data that's maybe bad by definition. So I don't want outliers. I don't care about outliers, or I do want outliers. I only want to look at things in band, OPC quality maybe. We have to be able to combine multiple sources, normalize time points. We have to be able to standardize into a single format. And then we have to be able to validate, calculate, and store the results with version history. So if something changes in an underlying data source, I need those calcs to rerun. And then ultimately, once all that's done, I have to be able to share it. I have to share it via reporting with people and easy access, preferably single API or single endpoint to applications. So that's kind of that gold standard, right? That's what we want to be able to do. So if we look at the UNS is going to help with some of this. It's going to help us define structure. It's going to help us define events. It's going to help us with connecting to real time. It's going to help us with single point access. There's applications I can add to my UNS like HighByte that are going to help me with calculations, real-time calculations. But what's missing is how are we going to bring in the historical side? How are we going to do more of the advanced analytics driven pieces of this? And then ultimately also, how are we going to combine multiple namespaces to create a unified namespace? All right, and so that brings us kind of to that next slide.
Oops, sorry.
No, you're fine. Keep on going.
You tell me.
Keep going one more. Look at that animation, and here it comes. There it is. Okay. So what happens when we have a new acquisition? We've got a new asset that we're now bringing into our UNS, and it frankly just doesn't match the UNS. And this is the rebuttal I get the most when I'm talking with someone about UNS is they say, hey, this isn't going to work for us. I'm in oil and gas. We pick up new assets every quarter, and we've already got 7 different naming standards, and we're not going to ever agree on one. Okay. Well, we've got to find a way to get rid of that right there, right? We can't bring in new assets and then go right back to point. So we need a way to incorporate multiple namespaces, maybe even make allowances for maybe a site to carry a namespace that's different than another site if need be. I'm not saying best practice, but if need be, we can't necessarily just stop a plant and do a full name changeover just for the sake of unification if we can find other ways to make it work. So if the real need here is on the data analytics side, right? So maybe my plant, let's just assume we have 2 plants and that each plant's operating on a different namespace. Independently, are those plants functioning and making widgets and doing it at a high rate and everything they need? Possibly, right? Let's assume that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Where I run into problem with those plants having completely different naming conventions is really at the next layer, at the enterprise data layer, where I'm trying to do some of my analytics. And so what we want to introduce is the concept of the Unified Analytics Framework. And the Unified Analytics Framework, we believe, will help, number one, create a single place like a UNS to be able to access all of the relational, historical, transactional data that we need to empower our analytics. Number 2, we believe it will help account for multiple namespaces and create a unified information model / namespace that inherits the structure and the events from the UNS, but allows for a translation service, if you will, so that I can bring multiple UNSs into a standardized analytics or information model. And I think probably a slide would be a good point to go on here, Kevin. And one more. Okay. So, excuse me, nothing really changes from the UNS when we look at how we move data from devices, gateways, into SCADA applications or historian. Where we start to see the difference is when we start looking at how we interact with our other typically enterprise level applications. The UNS is still aware of those applications and still has full access to those applications, but it's actually coming through a piece of technology that's part of the UAF, and that would be our next slide. And one more. There we go. So the concept here is that we take two different namespaces. First namespace represented by the devices, PLCs, SCADA historian at the top. Second namespace is the standard UNS, and that we're able to do a translation of those two different namespaces into a universal analytics information model. And that's what the UAF ultimately is it is a place for your integration work to live, so that we are connecting to our sources, we are creating that information model, we are defining our KPIs and our events, we are cleansing data, we are calculating and doing combinations of multiple data sources into new streams, we are recording and storing the outputs of KPIs and events and all of the attributes around them, and then we are serving that data to the other applications in our environment, and we're serving that data to the UNS, meaning
So,
real time.
Yeah. So I want to step back and kind of summarize to make sure that I have it right and to help people really engage with this. So, first idea is that we're moving away from stovepipe, vertical stack, Purdue, Industry 3.0, call it what you like. And we're assuming that, at least generally speaking, maybe not all the time, and this is a question I have for later, the unified namespace is a good thing. So single version of the truth, data is accessible. We're then connecting to everything and everyone across the organization. And in that, then we're modeling the data for the plant, how it operates, ISA 95, tree, leaf kind of structure, enterprise site, area line cell. And in that, we're publishing data from PLCs and other devices, and we're defining our UDTs, and we're modeling the data and then making that data available. We're then getting data from ERP and MES, combining, adding context within UNS, but it's only real time. It's only real-time data. And at that point, if we want to start to analyze it, then we've got to pull it up into multiple tools, and then that becomes a problem. So what you're saying is that we're then carrying over that structure into the UAF, into the Unified Analytics Framework. And then at that point, we're able to do, production counts by shift, by day, by blah, 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 and temperature, by this, by that, by the other, and be able to get that data with context so it becomes information and get that into the analytics tools, number one. And also, if I understand you correctly, then we can make that data available and push that data back to the ERP or the MES, et cetera. So it's bi-directional communication. And then take it even further for the infrastructure that doesn't fit within the unified namespace. Oil and gas example that you gave. It's, we don't want to shut down. It's got a different namespace. We're not ready to integrate it into the UNS yet. We can still connect to those devices as well, or to get that data into this whole framework, this analytics framework, by connecting that to the framework itself. And then we're also including that data into this standard, if you will, this strategy, and being able to convert that data information and get that into the same analytics tools without doing all that duplicate work, duplicate integrations with the stovepipe and all that kind of stuff. Is that a fair, slightly long-winded summary of the whole thing?
It's a great summary. And there's one thing I would add to that that we haven't discussed in this, and that is the concept that if a database or a data source is connected to the UAF, and I am connected to the UAF, I should be able to ask the UAF, query the UAF for data
You're right.
that is
You're
stored
right.
in those underlying databases. So let's do this ourselves. You brought up ISA 95. Let's just assume that we've got two lines side by side. We're making grape soda, the greatest soda of all time, right? One line is running a canary historian, and the other line is running a wonderware historian. For whatever reason, I don't know, but they are. and those tags are completely different. The naming's different, everything's different, right? But I can guarantee you that on each line we have a totalizer. And we have defined a KPI that is good, bad, and total count. And we want to understand that by shift. Sound good? That's our model.
Okay.
Right. Our model has the concept of filler. We know how many bottles we're filling. We're a palletizer, and we know how many bottles are coming out. Okay, whatever. We can build that information model in that standard ISA 95 format. And we can define those KPIs and give them a universal name of what we want to measure. This is good count. This is total. This is bad count. We can add the context of a calendar to the UAF. I know when my shift starts. I know my personnel pattern. I know my operator number on this line for this shift. Okay. My operations team would be responsible. So whoever's the engineer for line one, whoever's the engineer for line two is responsible for connecting the historian tags in the canary system and the wonderware system into the UAF and associating those tags to those KPIs. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we're a data.
We're assuming different tag naming conventions and structures.
Okay, yeah. I don't even know how they connect them, right? Maybe there's a nice API. Maybe I don't care. Right. I don't even care how they're connected. Do I have access to them? I do. Cool. Okay. So now we're on the analytics side of this whole thing. And you and I are running some type of a model, and we need the raw data from those two lines totalizers for the last 60 days. It's not being stored in the UAF right now, right? That's over in two different historians. That's in two different applications. Typically what happens, you're going to have to figure out, to have a conversation with somebody on site. You're going to have to understand those historians. You better hope that you can connect remotely. You better hope that you understand the right API call, and you have to understand the tag naming, yada, yada. With the UAF, I don't have to do that. I know those historian tags are connected to the KPI I call good product. I can ask the UAF, please provide me raw data for the totalizer tag or the source tag for total produced for good bottles. And the UAF will then go to the underlying historians that it's already connected to and already aware of and say, hey, I've got a query from analytics that says I need this. It'll get that information. And the beauty of this whole thing, Kevin, is that what it's going to provide is going to be a single format, because you're hitting, maybe it's a web API or REST API. You're hitting a REST API when you're asking for this data. And so whether it's information that's in a SQL database or a Canary or InfluxDB, doesn't matter. You're going to get the same JSON payload, and you're going to get the exact same data structure without ever having to understand the tag names of those historians or those databases, and without ever having to really have any knowledge of the structure of those databases. You're going to have a single output that's ready for you to work with.
So there are a couple questions, really good questions too, that I want to get to. First, so the idea, just to summarize what you just said, so within an analytics tool, or maybe within the MES, because we have a basic analytics screen that I want to see summary of this, that, and the other, then what I'm doing is with the idea of this idea that I can query the data, the central set of data. So then I go to the MES and say, give me data from here to here. It's this type of data, these type of tags. Then this system is reaching out to the historian and saying, hey, what is this? Give it to me. And then I have access to it through this open common format that you talked about. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea. And What we're not doing is we're not replicating the data just to replicate the data. We are letting the original data sit in the databases that are designed to hold it and store it for long periods of time. We're letting it stay there. What we're essentially doing is we are, think of it maybe as, I'll try to coin a phrase, I don't know if it'll stick, but just-in-time analytics. Like we don't need to create a data warehouse or a data lake house, is the term I've been hearing lately. If we can rely, if we are confident in the process historians to site, or if we're confident in the SQL database that we're using to be available to us when we need it. Now, I get that there's arguments on why you may want to replicate historical data and at different levels. Fair enough. I'm not arguing against the replication of historical data. I'm simply saying we don't have to in order to be able to provide access to those databases.
So then is the UAF, and this is going to start to answer one of the questions that Tony has, which is a good one. Tony asks, so are we cubing, dimensioning the data in the UAF? Cubing and dimensioning, the idea is doing a data warehouse and creating dimension and fact tables where you're changing how the data is organized. Different than a time series data format or relational data format. You're optimizing the data structure and the schema, and thereby the physical data structure for querying. That's typical for BI tools, business intelligence tools. So the question for you is then, in this UAF here, are we storing any data at all that is raw? You've answered that one. We're not storing raw data. Are we storing any data that is processed, cleansed?
We are.
Maybe not quite. Okay, go ahead.
We are. So the first thing, you think of it as two different data stores. Think of it as a configuration store. A lot of the cleansing doesn't need to be restored, right? We don't typically need to cleanse data and then store the outcome of the cleanse of raw data, right? If we can process that cleanse in stream. So think of one of the stores as being, how am I going to treat the data when it is queried? So I always want to, maybe my rule for our totalizer is I'm always going to throw out values with OPC bad quality status. I wouldn't replicate all of that data a second time and rewrite it just because of the bad quality. I would just create a stream that filters that. So the configuration of those calcs and those cleansing rules, validation rules, that gets stored in configuration. But anything that you're going to calculate and then run on a period or on a time interval makes sense to restore. So maybe it's I want every minute I want to run a standard deviation of these. I want to create a new data set, right? I've got a dozen pieces of instrumentation. There's a back of panel temp, and these dozen pieces of maybe I'm on a solar farm. And I want to just take the standard deviation of this set of instrumentation. I want to understand the backplate temperature. I might write a new value every 5 minutes that gives me the standard deviation of that population so that I can then compare the temperature against that and decide whether or not I want to use that piece of instrumentation in my analytics based on how it compares to the other pieces of equipment that it's in the same data set of. So there's times where I'm going to want to rewrite for population comparison, but mainly I'm writing data in when it comes to readily available KPIs based on event period or time interval.
Okay, so you hit it there. That's where I was. Yes.
Yeah.
So you're potentially we have the option or choice to store the process data, the measures, the KPIs, whatever you want to call them, but the raw data is not stored. So if some system queries data, if it wants raw data, great, it'll go to the source. If it wants measures that are already processed and stored there in the UAF, then those are returned pretty quickly. And then that answers it. I think Robbie's marked it as answered here in our questioning tool here. Is the UAF somewhat the same as post-processed data lake in iceberg format? And I'm assuming iceberg format in cold storage, cold as opposed to lukewarm or hot storage, as far as the data activity in those storage mediums. I think it is, but yeah, I think the answer would be yes, that it's post-processed kind of data. It's not a data lake. The data isn't in a data lake. It is into a structured format. Data lakes are for unstructured data. But I think the concept is there is that it is process the KPIs, they're stored, and at that point they're relatively cold, and they sit there
Yeah.
waiting to be queried. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah. And it's one of those that, the thing that we see over and over again is that when we are talking about enterprise level analytics, data scientists and analysts, the data teams, they keep asking for data in CSV format. Raw data, like I can't tell you the number of times from the historian side it's been, yeah, we just need CSV files of daily raw data for this large set of tags. Like, okay, cool. What are you gonna do with it? Oh, well, why CSV? Okay, well, we want it in wide format, and we're going to take the raw data and we're going to run some aggregates and get into 1 minute aggregates for these 5 typically standard OPC aggregates. Oh, okay, cool. So would you really want the raw data if you could just get this in wide format and have it ready for you whenever you need it? Oh, okay. Well, no, that's actually what we want. So it's like most teams actually don't want raw data. The reason they're asking for raw data is because they've been conditioned that they need to, so that they can then get it ready for the work that they want to do. Now,
It's
imagine
like most people buy a car not to drive, but to get to a destination. Some people do buy a car to drive, but most of it, you want the results. You want to get where you're
that's
going.
exactly right. That's exactly right. Good question came in from Peter.
Yes.
He's asking, so wait, MES ERP is no longer connected to the UNS. It has to go through the UAF. So this is, this isn't any hard rules that we are suggesting in this diagram. I think that in most use cases, whether it's good, bad, or not, I don't know, but I think most companies aren't actually putting real-time data forth into their ERP and MES systems. I think most of them are connected via historian. So do they want historical data or do they want real-time data? If you needed real-time data coming into your MES, you're gonna duplicate that line from MES from UAF also to UNS. You might just go directly to UNS with MES. You're right. Meaning, if there's an MQTT broker there and you need real-time data, connect to the MQTT broker. I think ultimately, if we fast forward 5 years from now, I think UNS and UAF are kind of the same thing. It's the same concept. It's just UAF is what I would call maybe the next iteration of UNS. It's going to give us a strategy for bringing in more than just real time.
Yeah, it's making that historical data available and being able to query it. I would agree. Yeah. Are there other slides? I think.
So hey, we should talk about technology. So when we're doing this, what are the rules? Like, how do we analyze whether or not we should be dropping solutions into this type of strategy? If we got to make some gold standards of evaluating potential vendors to include in a UAF architecture, I'm going to go ahead and first and do a spoiler alert. There is no silver bullet right now. There's no vendor that I could just point to you and say they're going to hit every single one of these for you. But this is what good vendors are running towards right now. So it's really important to understand vendor roadmap when you're having conversations around UAF. Okay. So the very first requirement is we have to be able to manage and deploy these solutions at scale. And what does that mean? If I'm managing this size of a data architecture, because ultimately that's what this is. This is going to be a huge amount of connectivity, depending on the scale of the enterprise, could be massive. I have to be able to manage all of that from a central location. So that's going to lead us into scalable technologies like containerization, possibly microservices, although containerization seems to be favored. So I have to be able to templatize. I have to be able to do mass deployments. if I've got our totalizer, if we are making grape soda and we're doing it at scale, and we decide to change the way we define a KPI, we have to be able to deploy that across all of our lines without having to go physically hit each line and reprogram that KPI, right? So to scale has to be centrally deployed and managed. All right. Requirement 2, the work we've done in the UNS has to be inherited. So I'm not throwing the work of the UNS out. I'm actually learning from it, and I'm bringing that into this environment. Requirement 3, and this is that translation of multiple namespaces, bi-directional translation service for real-time and historic data between the UNS and terminate systems. Think of it this way. If I've got that Wonderware historian and I've got that totalizer tag, and my data team finds some really cool magic KPI that my operator needs to know about, my operator should be able to browse the tag structure inside of that historian or inside of his Wonderware environment and see that new KPI and see it show up in a namespace that makes sense to their environment. So it's not just translating a namespace into the standard. It's taking new insights and reducing that into the original namespace as well. Potentially being able to do that. That's a concept that is super young, I don't know anybody that's actually doing that. And it may not be something that proves to be valuable, but at this point, bi-directional is something that we're looking at and trying to explore and how we do this. Any questions on the first 3 before we hit the last 2?
I did want to throw out just a quick reminder, and Kine, the awesome guy behind the scenes that's making a lot of this happen, could you please drop out those 2 documents? There are 2 documents that Jeff has written that are really good. One gives they're similar visuals to what you saw here for the UAF. It's an explainer document, PDF, really nice document, and the other one is 3 blind spots, and I like that one a lot. It brings up a number of key points that we've been talking about here. So Kine's dropping those now. Looks like he just dropped them. Thank you for doing that, Kine. Download those, grab those, read them. They're really good. Just wanted to throw that out there. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. And I did write those. There was no Chat GPT involved in the production of either. That's going to be a new, some type of a standard seal you have to get on a document.
Right. You've written by you.
All right. So data contextualization, validation, cleansing, calcs, and event monitoring at scale. This is that gold standards of analytics has to happen inside the UAF, and it has to be able to do it at scale. And then finally, requirement 5, all connected data sources and structure made available through a single query and publish endpoint, standard universally accepted open format. So if it's connected to the UAF, I've got to be able to query it from a single endpoint. And Kevin, you had asked me, I think, in prep for this, hey, so what does that endpoint even look like?
Yes.
Real simple.
Yeah. Yep.
At minimum, REST API, right? Like that probably is the minimum requirement, but what else should it look like? It should probably GraphQL, maybe open up to some other technologies. Python would certainly make sense to be able to support what most of our data teams are already going to be working within. Don't know. This is the early days of a concept. I know that everything that I'm seeing, there's a lot of vendors that are focused on industrial data ops now. And this is, I think, what we are all working towards in that space.
Yeah. For me, when I look at these 3 or these 5 items, 4 of them connect and make a lot of sense. Number 3, I'm not sure because we don't run into that too much. If we're connecting to systems, they're all typically going into the UNS. But the distributed architecture, getting that single access point makes a ton of sense. And being able to scale it and distribute it, it's got to scale. The inheriting the UNS model number two, that makes a ton of sense as well. You've got a model, and it's a really good model for the plant and how it runs. Let's use that. Let's capitalize on that. Number four, for me, this is pre-processing of data, and then being able to have that available, that contextualized cleansing calculations. A lot of benefits are having those KPIs immediately available for using, and also the data is already cleansed. Data scientists, anywhere between, I've heard numbers like 60 to 90% of their effort in doing analytics work is to cleanse and contextualize the data. But it's already done. You got the model with the UNS, which is carried over into the UAF, and you have this data already processed. Doing analytics and doing BI is straightforward at that point. And then the fifth one, being able to query this and also to publish. Those two words right there, query and publish, for me are huge. That really takes it up a level, and that's this, I think, of an overlay or a foundation or the join with the UNS that makes this immensely valuable. It's real time with UNS and model and all that in single source, but then let's have that data available as well. That then becomes a awesome combination. It's like the Wonder Twins, though I'm aging myself by referencing the Wonder Twins.
Exactly. Well, and like I say, number three is a super early concept. I think it's it might prove of no value, but it also might prove that, yeah, that's where I heard that for the first time. Might be a thing. We'll see. But
Yep.
What is the need? The need is for feedback. And so to our audience, I would has downloaded the document, that has attended this. These are conversations that we want to have. We want to have them inside of this community, integrate live community, it doesn't matter, just one-on-one emails. Really appreciate feedback, and anything that you've seen or experienced. If we can learn from that, it'll help us.
Yeah. One of my questions was going to be, where is that conversation happening, and that would be something that would really like to define. So Q&A, a couple other questions are coming in. So Peter, requirement number 5, big issue with UNS is not being able to query data without knowing the structure ahead of time. When you mention query, you can discover information without knowing the structure ahead of time. Give me information for pumps in my UNS. Jeff, thoughts around that?
Yeah, great question. So I can speak from my, I can put my vendor hat on and just discuss like how I've solved this problem and how I could see the UAF solving this problem as well. And it's the concept of, on that query, everything has to be searchable. It can't you have to be able to search the model. You have to be able to say, show me the layout of the model. I want to be able to browse and understand the model. I want to be able to browse and understand everything that's attached to the model, the attributes of those things. And so by giving us the ability to start with just a understanding of what this information model looks like and search that via that endpoint is going to help, I think, solve that problem.
And there was another question, Tony. One use case for number 3 is balance accounting. ERP message to the plant floor to adjust production volumes, such as customer demand.
Yeah. So just taking high level conceptual data and dropping it into a contextualized naming convention so that the plant can understand it without having to learn what that means for them. Right. So, and Tony, those are the types of use cases that have kind of brought life to that requirement number 3.
Yeah. That's a good point, Tony. Thank you. So 2 thoughts questions for you, open questions that you don't have to commit to now, but where can this conversation happen?
Where can the conversation happen?
How are you continuing this conversation? Around the UAF and developing it and solidifying and all the rest of that.
Yeah. So I think it has to become driven by good partners. And what does that mean? It means integrators like Ectobox. It means end users that have a digital maturity and have a maybe a commitment to the community. So a great example, again, I've just learned about Sesame last week, but this is what Sesame is working towards. And they have aligned with a lot of Fortune 500 companies that say, yes, this is a problem and we want to find a solution. Now, do they know it by the name of UAF? They don't. Now, I've introduced the concept just last week, and I believe that maybe there's somebody even on this call that was in that meeting that have been in both. But I think one of the things that we can do is, as a collective, we can join where the work's already being done. We don't need to reinvent another group to try to move this forward. If an organization like Sesame says, hey, yeah, no, this is what we're talking about too, we just maybe use different terms. Great, let's all work together and let's get a driving voice behind that. And so we're still looking to find the right champion, but communities like Industry 4.0, Integrate Live, vendors as well that are in this space are helping evangelize and just make the term. It's an education issue, I guess, Kevin, is what I'm trying to say. Nobody knows what to build, and we need to give them a roadmap.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. An idea, a phrase that I like a lot, one of many things that I like a lot from what Walker Reynolds has talked about, the 4.0 solutions, digital transformation, whether the phrase is overused or not, educate first, then it's strategy and architecture, and then let's solve problems. And quite honestly, I could really relate that to this as well. Let's educate first, understand the problem space, understand what the solutions could look like. Let's define a strategy. A lot of, or some of what you were talking about early on in this conversation was the ad hoc approaches to doing analytics work, and then you end up with a mess and it's not flexible and all the rest of that, and have an architecture, a framework, which the UAF is, and then let's solve real problems with it. Let's get out there and do it. Let's, at that point, stop talking and start doing it. To that point, it's my nice segue over to the last point that I wanted to make, which is what I'd like to do is to start to get out there and look at real examples. The people that we end up talking with and that attend these kinds of events for us are the ones that are out doing it, executing these kinds of solutions. And so the more we get out and show people actually how solutions work, the more we can add a lot of value to the community. There's a UNS webinar series we're doing right now, and attendance is really good because people want to understand it. Other people and organizations are doing a great job of helping define what the UNS is and illustrate how it works, but there's some missing gaps in just even the education part of it. We're trying to fill those gaps, and people are really enjoying those sessions. Same thing here. Let's actually show how it works, how you put it together, how you get it done. And so, Jeff, if you're open to it, I'd like to work with you in the future about trying to do that and keep this conversation going in the community too. This is so valuable, ridiculously valuable.
All of our Integrate Live content moving forward is going to be focused on building out UAFs architectures. Awesome. So integratelive.com if you're interested in following us over there. But again, I think we need to find this has got to be a greater than one voice conversation.
Yep, absolutely.
I really appreciate, Kevin, you having me on today, and thank you for the great audience participation.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good questions. Thank you all for the questions. We are right at an hour, so that looks like pretty much a good time to cap it at this point.
I like it. Hey, I wanted to tell you, was part of decommissioning of a robot last week.
Oh, yeah, how did it go?
May he rest in pieces.
Your dad jokes live on forever. Great life.
Always.
Can you? I won't be able to do it justice, but because I'm in Pittsburgh, and we have opening day the day after tomorrow, home opener. Can you tell the one about the Pirates?
Oh yeah. Fair enough. Hey, Kevin, what's a pirate's favorite letter?
I don't know. What is the pirate's favorite letter?
Well, sometimes people say R, and sometimes people say no, it's the C. But actually, it's the letter from the general manager of the Yankees telling them they've been traded.
Yeah, I love that joke. It's so funny. And It speaks a lot to our pirates, which is, well, and I'll just leave it there.
All right.
All
Hey,
right.
Kevin,
Thanks so much, Tony. You're right. It's time to go. On these jokes, yeah, it's time to go.
thank you,
All
everybody.
right. Thank you, everybody.